Welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast with me, Dan Haylett. This show will help you navigate the intricate financial and non-financial landscape of retirement planning, investment and income strategies, and the human experience beyond the traditional work-life paradigm. Join me as I delve into the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected journeys individuals face as they transition into this new phase of life. From experts across many different areas to personal stories, we uncover the secrets, insights, and practical tips to empower you on your retirement journey. Whether you're just starting to consider retirement or already enjoying this chapter, this podcast is your guide to making the most out of this remarkable phase of life. Now, on to the show. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Humans versus Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett. I've got a question for you. Have you ever thought about how your relationship with your spouse or partner will change when you're retired? And do you understand how the dynamic around your money will shift? Well, Ed Coambs, a financial planner and therapist and author of The Healthy Love and Money Way, joins me on this episode of the podcast to delve into this and much, much more. As well as being a certified financial planner, Ed has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy with a mission to help couples uncover and understand the roots underlying their financial conflicts and move towards financial intimacy. Ed's formula for success is financial planning plus financial therapy plus couples counselling equals healthy love and money. Ed and I discuss the challenges couples face in managing money and planning for retirement, as well as the concept of financial intimacy. Ed highlights the role of attachment theory in understanding a couple's dynamic around money. Ed also looks at the importance of creating a safe space for vulnerability and open communication, as well as the influence of childhood experiences on money management and the challenges of spending money in retirement. I hope you get loads out of this conversation with Ed Coambs. Ed Coambs, a very, very warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Dan, thanks so much for having me here today.
Can't wait for the conversation, Ed, all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, the other side of the pond. It's a beautiful thing to be able to network out, meet and have conversations with experts and really interesting people. So I nerd out on these conversations as much as I know the listeners love to listen to them as well. So really looking forward to this.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I do love talking about couples, money, and retirement.
That's a really good job because I think they're the three things we're absolutely going to focus on. So let's get down to it. And obviously that taps right into your expertise. And we will get on to your book, your podcasts and that in a minute. But obviously, like any good podcast host, I do a little bit of research on the people that I speak to before they come on. And your journey, Ed, is a pretty interesting one, right? And I often ask people, actually, I always ask people, can you give me a little bit about your background and your journey? Without spoiling it, I think yours is probably going to be one of the more unique ways to get into where you are now and where you're sitting. So please indulge us and share us your journey and how you've ended up where you are.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking. Yeah, it's definitely not been a planned journey. Right? You know, you would think listening to a financial planner coming on the podcast, like I have this grand vision for my life and how I got to being this financial planner that I am. No, it's been more of a walking forward, trusting I'll figure it out as I go kind of thing. So I started my professional life as a firefighter and, I wanted to help people. Some would say I had a little bit of a hero complex. I wanted to save the day. And, who doesn't want to ride on a big red truck that goes driving down the road super fast? I did at least. But the realities of working as a firefighter were not just about saving the day, but it was sitting around the firehouse listening to the guys talk about their lives and their wives and money. And some of them were pretty frustrated and pretty overwhelmed. And, I thought, well, shoot, I really don't want that to be my issue when I grow up. I don't want to have money conflicts. So how do I solve that problem? And so we had a guy coming around doing retirement accounts for firefighters, and I started to learn some from him. And one thing led to another. I realized like, oh, there's this whole world I'd never heard of called investments and financial planning, financial advising. And so I really just started reading lots of books about it, trying to figure out how does money work and how do I do a good job with it. And one thing led to another, and I realized I want to go in this direction. I met my wife. She was finishing up dental school, and talk about a money experience. I was like, whoa. I mean, I know doctors and dentists make more than firefighters. Most people know that. But when you hear the actual numbers, it's a little shocking. And so I just became more convicted. I need to know how money works. So left firefighting, got my MBA, got my certified financial planner, all this time thinking, if I just know how money technically works, I won't have any issues with my wife and money or in my family. Everything will be great. Well, Dan, we're far enough into life to know that's not how the story actually goes.
Yeah.
Right? It's, money is more complicated than the numbers, and how to find the right investment and the right tax strategy. Those are important things. How to have a budgeting conversation. But that's kind of the point, is my ideas about how to budget and save were different than my wife's. And just because I had my MBA and CFP didn't mean she always agreed with them. And that left my head scratching, because I would also go and talk with my clients and with my other families, and I would say, well, you should just do this. And they wouldn't do it. And that made me quite frustrated. So I went back to school to become a therapist to try to better understand, well, how the heck do people work? Now, Dan, I got more than I bargained for, because I had no idea really what therapists actually do.
People are quite complex, aren't they? Really?
It turns out we are quite complex. We love a simple idea about how we work, but man, we are way more complicated than our simple ideas. But that set off this journey of continuing to learn and question it. And, here's the funny thing is, I was thinking I needed to figure out everyone else. And you know what therapy taught me? I needed to figure out me and what's going on, right? That was one of those big lessons, is I was so focused on trying to help everyone else, I didn't know that I had to figure out some stuff for myself. And that's not an uncommon theme for a lot of people helpers, is they're so focused on helping others that they kind of lose sight that they might actually need some help too. So it's been this kind of long unfolding journey. I keep trying to learn, keep trying to better understand. Along the way, I ultimately found this group called the Financial Therapy Association, which is a group of financial planners and therapists that are working together to say, these two professions are really important, but they don't really talk to each other, but they have a lot to offer each other. So how do we bring them together? And so I've spent the last about 10 years really studying, reading, researching, talking with these other professionals and saying, how do we bring these two worlds together to help people have a healthier, happier life with each other, with themselves, and with money? So yeah, it's been quite an incredible journey.
You've summarized it very well, but probably not done the roller coaster as much, as much justice as you should have done with that, right? I would imagine it was a roller coaster journey that you went on to kind of get with, and that realization, right? Those wake up moments that you've probably had through that around, it's a money thing, right? So let's get the spreadsheet thing nailed. Yeah. Oh my God, it's not about the spreadsheet. Let's get the human thing nailed. Oh my God, it's not about other people. It's about me. Let's get me sorted out, and then I can then I can do it. And I think it's a really interesting lesson for everybody, isn't it? It's that put the put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I think when in any walk of life, when we're trying to do things or help people or understand things, actually focusing inward is a really important place to start with. And I think I suppose it's a segue actually into that. I mean, the line on your website I think is amazing. You're an expert in helping couples develop financial intimacy, helping to stop money fights and reconnect. And you're one of only 50 financial therapists in the US. Now, kind of when you start thinking about that, when we start thinking about couples, which is obviously your area of expertise, and we start thinking about retiring, I think too many people assume that the other person's thinking the same thing, and they don't actually look inwards, do they? They're not going, well, actually, let's kind of think about what I'm doing and let's then have the conversations and understand what my partner, my spouse is thinking about, because they're really challenging, right? They're really challenging conversations. You must have come across that a hell of a lot.
Every day, right? And whether it's the couple that's entering retirement, the couple that's 10, 15 years away from retirement, or it's the couple that's already entered into retirement, right? That point of retirement, just that concept alone is a very loaded concept. What does that mean? There's very few people that if you say the word retirement, they will not have some thoughts or associations connected with it. Now, what those are will be widely varied. And when we're talking with couples, the challenge is when my ideas about retirement and your ideas of retirement don't overlap like two circles, we've got to do some sorting out to figure out whose vision of retirement is going to be fulfilled. How are we going to balance when maybe the circles, very few couples where the circles are completely disconnected from each other. But like a Venn diagram, often there's some overlapping, but there's some that's different. And how couples navigate the shared interest and desires for the retirement and also the different, their own unique spins, that's where a lot of the friction starts to show up.
Your book, The Healthy Love and Money Way, and the podcast, The Healthy Love and Money Podcast that you've got, are kind of wonderful resources, and the links will be in the show notes for the book and the podcast. I think it kind of really kind of plays into this particular area, doesn't it? It's about, financial well-being and understanding that there is there's a health element. You can have an unhealthy relationship with money, which could lead to an unhealthy relationship with family and friends close to you that have a very different relationship or a different view on money. So it's a very interconnected world, isn't it? When we look at it from that perspective. Tell me a bit about the book, and tell me a bit about your the journey you went on to write that, and what that really has kind of allowed you to do, and how the title of that book really impacts you and the work that you do.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I appreciate you asking. And this will tie back to some of that career journey is, sitting here telling you today a little bit about my career journey, it's kind of easy to make it sound as if it was this like smooth journey to ride through. But yeah, it was definitely a roller coaster with some very high highs and some very low lows. And so the book came out of a period of time. I was in grad school for the third time. So I got my MBA, I got my master's in counseling, and then it was like, I met a mentor of mine. He said, "You're the future of financial therapy. I think you need to get a doctorate." And I had been kind of considering that. This is part of that personal story that shows up in my book is I have felt insecure in my marriage in relationship to my wife for most of the time. And I've been trying to rack my head around, well, why is that? What is this about for me? And how do I alleviate this pain in a productive way? And it's trying to find the most constructive ways to work through it. The book is me trying to reconcile this quest of trying to understand myself and my own relationship with money. And by sharing my own struggles and foibles and hopes and aspirations, I hope to provide comfort and solace for others, to normalize the fact that very few of us have a consistently happy, healthy experience with money and the many associations with money. So it's not just the cash, but for me, part of what I'm alluding to is the social status. My wife is a dentist. I am not. So we go to a party. How do people respond to her versus me? And it was more in the early years, but like, oh, you're a doctor. There was this kind of excitement, this curiosity. Oh, you're a financial planner. Oh, you're a therapist. And look, let's be honest. Most of us put certain professions on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And so she had the pedestal. I did not. And some listeners might say, well, that sounds like a jerk thing. Well, yeah, my brain was wired. She was making the lion's share of money. My value system says, great, women make more money than men. No problem. but my value system and my actual psychological functioning were not lining up.
Mm.
And so that, that's that money side, but there's also, those are some of the money lenses, but there's this relational expectation. This is what I write about in the book. And what came out of the third graduate degree is, psychologically speaking, why? What's going on there? And this really big field of study called attachment theory in psychology has been around for about 80 years. And there's massive textbooks written on this subject alone. But what we're really, in essence, looking at in attachment theory is, how do our earliest caregiving relationships set a relationship map in our mind and relationship expectations? And when you boil down this complex, long study of human interaction and attachment bonding, you end up with people falling broadly in one of four categories: secure, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. Now, what does that mean is, I feel generally secure in relationships. That means I have a generally positive view of myself and a generally positive view of other people, especially my intimate partner. When things get difficult, I have a sense that they'll be there with me. When things are good, I have a sense that they'll celebrate with me. And if they don't, I trust that we'll work it out. If I have an anxious attachment, I generally have a positive view of others and a less positive view of myself. I'm more likely to be concerned that things may not work out in our relationship. And so I'm going to do things like being a people pleaser, or not stating my own needs, or working really hard to get you to be happy with me, right? I may not tell you about something I'm doing with my spending because I don't want you to disapprove me. I'm afraid of being rejected. If we go on the other end of this, the avoidant side is, I have a more positive view of myself, but I don't really trust that other people can be there for me. They can know me. They can understand my needs. They can meet my needs. They won't be there when I'm happy, and they may not be there when I'm sad. And those that are in the disorganized category have very mixed relational experiences, the hot and cold. Sometimes I had people there with me to support me, but maybe they were over-involved, too supportive. And sometimes they were nowhere to be found. Mm-hmm. And so these attachment patterns grow out of very real lived experiences with our primary caregivers. And so for me, it brought such a level of coherence around why I experience relationships the way I do. And this is not about blaming mom and dad. This is about understanding, because when we take it back another generation, we recognize we're all the benefactors of being cared for. Mm-hmm. Or the absence. We may not be a benefactor. We may not have had very caregiving relationships. Mm. So culturally, I think most cultures around the world would say parenting is a good and valuable thing, and we should love and appreciate having parents, right? Like, I think that that's generally accepted the globe around. And yet the reality is there's very diverse experiences with the availability of love, caring, emotional nurturance. And this ties right back into money. Is families will sometimes over-organize around financial provision and not emotional provision. And what the psychology is very clear on is there's no amount of financial provision that can override the need for emotional connection and relationship. So, yeah, let me stop there. That I know that's a lot to kind of unpack.
No, it's amazing. Absolutely. Look, I think from my point of view, a couple of the key takeaways for me is that it's a hard enough job trying to figure this out for yourself, let alone you bring someone else into the mix with this, i.e. your partner, your spouse. And then not only you doing that, but at the point of retirement, which is one of the biggest transitions that we'll ever make in our life, you're mixing almost three massive emotional and financial and kind of psychological areas of our lives and how it's going to impact into one great big melting pot. And you can see why people struggle both individually and as a couple to think about how to have those conversations and start to plan for this. Because as you've rightly said, our relationship with money and all of the emotional ties that brings comes from a very early place in our in our lives that's carried through that we may not end up understanding or revisiting for 30 or 40 years, right? It's kind of like it's stored in there somewhere, then it might hit us. And then you've got to understand your spouses to have some empathy around what they want to do and what they want to achieve. So I'm curious to understand from the work that you do, is there a common challenge or maybe a couple of common challenges that couples face when it comes to the whole kind of money life in retirement thing?
Yeah, I think the number one challenge, and I see this for couples that are at the point of retirement transition, but I see it as even beyond that, like from the earliest days of being coupled together to the end, is, and this is why I think attachment theory gives us a lot of explanation, but there's multiple ways to look at this. There's gender expectations too about whose role is it to manage the money.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's another layer that's mixed into this. So both but I think what happens in most households is that there's a division of labor and responsibility around different parts of the financial life. So you may have one partner that's responsible for the spending for the household needs while the other partner actually pays the bills. And then maybe the person that pays the bill also is responsible for the retirement planning, but maybe they're not. Maybe the person responsible for the retirement long-term planning is only responsible for that, but they're not responsible for paying the day in and day out, week in and week out months and the spending. Mostly, I mean, the long-term planner probably spends some money, but they're not doing the lion's share of that. And so you get this disjointed, unbalanced development of how these things relate to each other. And so as you go through that retirement transition, you're trying to figure out, how much money do we have to spend now? How much money do we have to spend in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years? And we're not planning to work anymore. So how do we take whatever we've been able to accumulate and translate that into income? And does that translate into the same level of income and standard of living that we've grown accustomed to? If we haven't been able to save in the way that we need it, how do we have that conversation with our partner about, here's what we can actually spend? And this comes back around to, like, what's the quality of the relationship between the two partners? And if they've never done the work of working on their own relational insecurities and finding healing and relational connection, they're not going to do it together. So the concept of financial intimacy is what I use to try to start bringing couples together is to say, all of your financial life is yours together. It's a shared responsibility. Now, you may have the long-term planner, but you are responsible for understanding it to some degree. You may not pay the bills month in and month out and do most of the shopping, but you do need to be aware of that from time to time. You do need to really slow down and understand that, because these things are so connected.
I think I know it's a really big point and really interesting the way that you frame that, Ed, because I do see a real a real binary type of couple. You have these couples that are very early on realize that this is a full-blown partnership, and yes, there might be some responsibilities kind of designated on them differently, but they definitely communicate about it and they talk about it. And when they enter into retirement, the conversations are a little bit easier, the transition's a little bit easier, right? But I think that's still in the minority. So the majority of people, there is a dominant spouse that deals with this, and they haven't worked in partnership on this stuff. They might have worked in partnership on other things, maybe raising the children and things. But when it comes to money and the emotional impact of money, and then what their thoughts around their career and their retirement is, they've never talked about this stuff. And for the first time in a number of years of marriage, they're going to have to get together and start thinking about this as a partnership. And I think that's a massive challenge for people to go, well, one of us has been hugely dominant. The other one doesn't want to know about this stuff, but we can't continue on that path, because that's going to lead to, a lot of disagreements and arguments, because now we've got more time on our hands. Now, we're both at home more. We're both looking to do things. that must be so damaging to some people's relationships if they haven't had those conversations a lot earlier than what they expect them to do. You know, my tip is not to wait until the year you're thinking about retiring to start these conversations, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I hope it's okay to share this on your podcast. And can I make a connection to the world of sex therapy and what they know from that field? Is that okay?
Absolutely. I've made this connection a couple of times when I've had at least one couple who I've asked some questions, and we get quite deep in kind of working with couples on this. And the wife has turned around and said, Dan, I'd rather be talking about my sex life than my financial situation to me, right? So, absolutely kind of, go ahead and make the comparisons, because I think it's definitely real.
Yeah, so I am not a sex therapist, but I have read a number of textbooks for sex therapists, and I've talked to sex therapists, right? And part of what they talk about is that sexual intimacy is far more than the act of having sex together, right? There's many facets to it, and there's many layers of our individual identities and expectations that are all interwoven into the ability to actually come together and be sexually intimate with each other. Mm-hmm. But couples that are open and reflective and curious and supportive of each person's sexual identity over the lifetime of their long-term relationship can actually have far greater sexual compatibility and enjoyment and pleasure, right? That their sex life improves. It may not be the 20-year-old type of sex that you have, but the meaningful connection that happens between the partners through that sexual experience becomes far more profound the more that they mature. Mm-hmm. And so that doesn't happen overnight. That's developed and cultivated. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's exactly what we're talking about here on the money side is if we can bring those same values of, I've just created this little cheat sheet, Dan, actually I'll share it with your listeners to help people think about how to have money conversations. It's called love. We're learning, we're open, we're vulnerable, and we're dealing with emotions, right? And when we bring that to the table, our ability to come together financially is very significant. And one of the things I first do with all the couples I work with is I take a family history around money. What experiences have you seen in your life around money and money management? What roles? Where has the pain shown up? Where has the joy and pride shown up? And man, when you lay that out with people, I was working with a new client very recently. He said, I guess now it makes sense why I feel so overwhelmed and confused. He's just entered in retirement, was very fortunate, built a very successful business, sold it, has more money than he's ever had in his life, and he's miserable. His wife has been anticipating this day for a long time and is ready to travel and enjoy this money. And then she sees him on the trip, kind of like a bump on the log. And because he hasn't really come to terms with the money messages he got from his family, she's not really sure how to work with the fact that he had these very harsh, critical money messages from his childhood. But she wants the reward and benefit of him not being available for the last 30 years while he was busy building this business. And so that's that other piece is if you build the wealth over your lifetime and career, but you're not building the emotional intimacy and connection, that transition in retirement is going to be a very rough ride. Mm. Contrast that with, I have some couples I'm working with right now. They've been fostering emotional connection and understanding each other for a couple of decades. And they come to me and their finances are not so strong. But man, working with them is a blast.
Yeah.
Because they leverage their emotional relational trust and connection to build energy towards the financial momentum. So it's much easier if you're emotionally connected to solve the money problems, because that's the other phrase I think we hear a lot is, when I feel loved, the money doesn't matter.
Hi everyone, Dan here. I just wanted to jump in real quick to say that if you are thinking about or unsure where to start with your retirement plans, then I've put together what I believe to be one of the best free resources for you. My retirement toolkit is packed with videos, guides, webinars, worksheets, blogs, and podcast episodes, and is completely free to download. Just go to the show notes where you will find the link. Now, let's get back to the show. And I come across this all the time with couples I work with. There's a want to accumulate a certain amount of wealth to be able to enjoy that at some point in the future. Right?
Sure.
So,
yeah.
These people, as you said, work hard, spend a lot of time away from family. There's blood, sweat, and tears that go into either a successful career or building a business. And they get to a point where there's a decision that they feel like they can step back and they can start to use their time. The problem is that they actually haven't thought about how they're both going to take advantage of that time. And then you end up in a stalemate situation, right? Where, you've worked so hard to get to this point, and yet you then go on autopilot a little bit. And one of the biggest catastrophes out there, I think, and out there is that these couples, they spend so much time getting to a point, they get to that they just don't know how to take advantage of all of that hard work. And they really, really struggle with letting go and doing that because they have not had those conversations. And two of the letters of love, I think, are really, they're all really important, what you said. But to me, the best couples that I work with are the most open and vulnerable with each other and with the professionals that they work with. And they air their stuff in a way that is constructive, but also they air it and they're vulnerable and they give you their background and they want to make things right. And if they're both like that, then as you said, you can get to that point where the emotional element of all of this is taken care of. And then people can take advantage of the thing they've built up to go and enjoy and create those memories and experiences.
100%. And I think, hopefully if you're hearing this, I hope that you're hearing inspiration and motivation and encouragement, because the other side of this that I know from my therapy training and work is until you have those experiences and in the environment to be open and be vulnerable and to not get absolutely emotionally crushed, you're not going to go there. Right. No. So
you're going to feel judged, aren't you? I think people don't do it because it's like shame and judgment.
Yeah.
And they need a safe space to come and do this. Right.
That's exactly right. Like, people that are closed down for a reason. Right. We close down psychologically for very understandable reasons. It's not psychologically safe to be vulnerable, to be open, to be curious and learning about oneself. And so that's the environment and culture that therapy tries to provide people. That's why we, in the therapy world, we use the word empathy so much. Like it is the number one tool that we have in our tool belt across all the different ways we practice. Is this concept, it's called unconditional positive regard. It's just, I'm here to accept fully the entirety of who you are. And, I'm still human. I still become judgmental outside, not in the therapy room, but, I'm driving down the street this morning. Heck, I was in my local coffee shop and this one was taking a long time backing in. And, I went into my judgmental brain. I was like, who are you? Why are you taking so long? I can't believe this. Right. But, so I'm still a human. Like I haven't completely arrived in some Shangri-La where I never judge people. But when we create a space and we hold space for non-judgment and curiosity, it allows people to know themselves more fully. And it is a rewarding feeling to feel that sense of safety of being known and to sharing it. It can feel scary as hell too, initially. Look, what was I saying in the beginning? As a firefighter, I learned not to show any vulnerability. Right? One of the stickers on the guy's on the back of his truck had in very aggressive letters, "No fear." Right? Which, maybe is a good thing as a firefighter. I would argue you probably need healthy fear, right? Because of what that can do to you running into a burning building. And so that's really part of why E is part of the love thing too, is the science of emotions is so incredible. And I know many people won't have the years to study all the science of the emotions, but our emotional system is absolutely spectacular. And it's such an essential part of being human. And so we just want to honor the full suite of emotions that all of us have as humans.
Do you think that, and this is just opinion of mine that isn't backed up in any type of doctorate or research, but this is kind of this is real world conversations.
Yeah.
This is not about, and for anyone listening here, in my opinion, this is not about changing who you are. This is more about understanding who you are and understanding who your partner is. And I think understanding is often more transformational than change, if that makes sense. So I think people have this fear, right, of going, right, I'm going into do financial therapy, financial planning, and I've got to change my views on spending. I've got to change my views on this. I've got to change my views on that. But actually, the biggest transformations I see is when they just understand. And you used the word empathy, right? So just understand and empathize. Doesn't mean that you have to do full 360 turns on views or you have to change the kind of the outlook on some things. But understanding is a big part of how couples can navigate retirement, in my opinion. I don't know whether you feel the same, and you can disagree.
Yeah, well, I would have an and disagreement. I think it's understanding and change are actually very deeply interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that some of the fear, my sense is that fear of being changed is changed into the person you don't want to become.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of that happens in the general society and family. Our parents have expectations of us. Our jobs have expectations of us. Our culture has expectations. Our religious groups have expectations. Man, there are all these places that give us expectations about who we're supposed to be.
Mm.
And so the last thing you want to do is show up on the therapist's doorstep and have them then say, well, nope, none of those were right, but I've got the reason, I've got the way you need to be to finally be you. And I think therapists, we try to reframe it from who do you want to be? What about these different lived experiences and identities are important to you? Which ones do you want to shed or let go of as much as you possibly can? Now, the good news, bad news is these experiences are all deeply embedded in the neuroarchitecture of your brain, i.e. the 2x4s of your brain, or I don't know, what size lumber do you use in the homes there?
Yeah, 2x4, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great, good. Right. So the 2x4s of your brain, so they don't just, you can't just go in there and surgically remove some of these expectations that you've taken from the outside world in. But to your point, which I fully agree, is when I understand how all these 2x4s within my brain, within my nervous system, then we can make peace with that too. And we can start to also exercise agency or choice. We can recognize, oh, you know what? I'm showing up like the way my mom always wanted me to be. I actually don't want to be that person. I want to be this person. Right. And so I want to normalize the fact that part of human growth and development is to take in external expectations of who we are. Like that's a normal and mostly a good thing about childhood, because our brains are wired to help us fit into the community we're born into. And we would be odd ducks if we looked like a Chinese person that spoke Swahili in the UK.
Yeah.
Right? Like if we came out of the womb and somehow could be Chinese looking, speaking Swahili, being raised by UK parents. That would be weird. No, you got to show up and you got to have the skin color and take on the tone and the taste and the music and to belong to this community. And belonging is an essential need of human well-being. But when those definitions of what it means to belong become too constrictive, that's when we experience the psychological distress. So there's this tension between being able to accept and take on whatever we've learned about who we're supposed to be, and then in adulthood, defining who we actually want to be. And culture plays a large role in that. I think this is, a huge value of kind of Western cultures, by and large, is, hey, you get to decide who you want to be.
Yeah.
Well, yes, to some extent, but culture is always going to shape to some degree who we are and who we think we're supposed to be. Inescapable.
I want to shift the conversation onto a really favorite topic of mine, and that is spending money.
I love that topic too, Dan. Take us there. I love the topic.
So, I believe one of the biggest things that I and we do for our clients in retirement is help them feel free to spend money, to create memories and experiences. I think most human beings struggle, and I think again the many years of being in accumulation mode and kind of earning and saving is a very, very challenging thing to turn the corner and now go, I'm now drawing on this money and I've got to now take it down. And if it starts going down, and it's okay. It's a very challenging bit. But I think if we add in all of these all the conversations we had previously, and we say that spending money in retirement is often approached from a spreadsheet angle, but it's probably one of the more deepest psychological challenges that people have. How can couples approach that delicate subject of both overspending and underspending? Because that can come from the childhood element of things, how we view our parents and our grandparents. And I think some of the challenges I see is that there's real conflict in someone wants to go and spend and be a little bit frivolous with their money, and the other person is very, very cautious. That's a huge challenge that many couples have to get over in order to have a fulfilling retirement.
Yeah, I think one way that I like to frame it with my couples is that you're two actors on the screen of life, and you've learned to play a role. Your responsibility in this relationship is to be the concerned one about money. And your role is to be the one that's a bit carefree about it. I was talking with a couple last night about this, and I had my hands like on a teeter-totter scale, and I said, for you, I'm trying to bring you up into caring about money a little bit more and being conscientious. And for the other, I'm trying to bring you down a little bit. But, this is, my brain goes to this is sometimes like a high stakes negotiation.
Yeah.
Because it's about trust. Because it's like, if I'm going to let go of being worried about spending money, but you don't pick up some concern, then we're in trouble. Right? If you don't change and I change, we could end up in trouble depending on degrees of severity. This is one of the most tragic cases that I worked with. Was a couple that was in about their mid-50s, and they had gone and seen a pastoral counselor that said they used the gender religion-based script and said, he's the head of the household. He should be responsible for managing the money. He was a spender. He had not developed a capacity for restraining spending. They got that advice 20 years earlier. So now they're into their mid-50s and they don't have much to show for it. And she's pissed. Understandably.
Yeah.
Right. So this is why if you received advice that you should do money a particular way because of who you are, whatever those identities are, but it doesn't fit with the way you actually do money, we need to renegotiate that. And it experiments in trust to move that needle. That's on the practical level. Sometimes we have to go deep into those childhood memories and restart working with those early experiences that we learned. Our bodies literally became conditioned to be fearful around money, to be hyper vigilant in monitoring it. Right? I watch people's bodies more than anything else when I'm talking about money. Because here's the thing, when we understand human growth and development, we understand money in our body before we even understand what money is as a concept. What do I mean by that? How many kids go through the grocery store with their parents? How many kids are in their family's home as the parents fight over money? How many babies are in the house listening to mom and dad scream about money, or stonewall and get silent when the topic of money comes up?
Yeah.
Babies' cognitive abilities not developed at all. Their nervous system is, though. And the baby's nervous system is very sensitive to what's happening in the environment. Oh, baby grows a little bit more and has more of the emotional awareness. Now it's a toddler and it's asking for a piece of candy at the store. or is bickering with its brother or sister, right? So we understand money first from a nervous system level, then from an emotional level. And, I have a 6 and 7-year-old boys right now, and I'm starting to talk to them about money. And do you know how much they understand? Not a lot, because they're still learning how to look at numbers written down and say, oh, that's 10, Dad. Oh, that's 20. Do they understand the difference between 10 and 100 and how much effort it takes to make $10 versus 100? No. But do they ask me the question, is that a lot of money? Because they have no frame of reference.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what creates so many opportunities for internal confusion about the role of money for all of us humans.
One of the things that you said, which I think is really interesting, is this, and you mentioned it earlier on, and you kind of touched on it just there about this balance thing, right? So you use your the teeter-totter, and I think balance is important because there is fundamentally there is 3 challenges, I think, when it comes to this spending money. The challenge that both of you are spenders. Mm-hmm. It could be massive.
That's a real challenge. Yes,
absolutely, right. And the challenge that both of you are cautious and underspenders is going to be huge. And then the challenge that you're opposites, right? So this is all about balance when it comes to going, well, if you're both overspenders, there's some kind of balance need to be done together, and some realization together, so you can work together on this. On the same kind of framework, maybe the balance of underspending and what that means. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say here is that no matter what your psychological, emotional, and the personality ties to this stuff needs a conversation. Whether you're both the same or both different, this thing needs a conversation, because all 3 of those avenues are as challenging for different reasons as any of them.
Yes, and I would love to build on that, because I think listeners, just stop for a minute, like rewind if you need to for a minute and hear what Dan just laid out. And now identify, which type of couple are we? Yeah. Are we the same in both being hyper-focused on saving? Are we the same on both not really paying a whole lot of attention and just hoping for the best? Or are we, one person is hyper-focused on paying attention and another person has their head in the clouds? And I don't say that with judgment. It probably sounded judgmental, so I'm sorry if that's what came across. I don't even mean it. I am that guy that, and Dan, in my adult life, see, this is part of what happens on our money journey too, is in my young adult life, I was the guy that was paying attention to all the things. I was going to learn all the things. Remember how much reading I said I did?
Yeah.
All I did was read about money. And then when everything that I wanted to translate to my wife was not landing, I threw my hands up in there and said, the hell with it. Yeah. And so I was like, fine, you do it. You take care of it. I don't want to be responsible for it. And I kind of, let's be honest, I collapsed. I just was like, I'm done with it. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to worry about it because I can't seem to shape or influence the outcome. This is what happens for us as humans in a very real way. And so both of those polarities are that. They're polarities. They're reactions to certain realities, present and past. But there's and this is I'm borrowing this from affect regulation theory. Dan Siegel, I'm going down a nerdy road here, but if people look up the window of tolerance, it's a concept from the field of interpersonal neurobiology, and it talks about our nervous system and regulation. But I think it brings a really important way of thinking about what we're talking about with money too, is there's over-focus on money, there's under-focus on money, right? Which these are the extremes that you laid out, Dan. But there's also this middle window of optimal functioning. It's not and that's why, I use that fulcrum point of a balance beam, but it's really, there is not an optimal save, spend, invest point. It does not exist.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
even if you could find it for one point in time, it's going to change at a different point in time. So conceptually, if we can bring our minds to, there's a window of balance between spending and saving and investing, right? And that's the vision, at least from my standpoint, for so many couples, that if you can practice that balance of living your life today and planning for the future, and this is why I love financial planning, is we can help people with the math so that they can have a sense of, if this is the life you want to have in the future, this is how much you need to accumulate. But if you're saying this is also important to you, here's how you can balance those two things. Right? And that's what we're trying to bring from this financial planning perspective is, how can we help you live today and in the future? How can we help you see that? And as humans, we're not really good at doing that. Like, we're just not wired to do that very effectively.
Right.
I mean, I can't do it on my own. I have to have math and software to help me orient that.
Yeah.
So, like, this is no bad on any of us as humans. Like, we all need some help.
I love a model that you put together, and as we kind of just wind this, it's been such a wonderful conversation, and there's one point I want to end on in the next minute or so, but and to kind of bring that point to life, we've talked about a little bit about kind of spreadsheets, right? We know it's not a spreadsheet thing, and one of my central philosophies or thesis, and I've got a drawing that says this, but retirement is more of a human problem than a maths problem, right? That's something that's fundamental to this. But if we want to put an equation on this, you've got one that I come across on your website, which I think is brilliant. This kind of equation of financial planning plus financial therapy plus couples counseling equals healthy love and money. So I love that. And I wanted to say it because I think it's a really cool triangle to think about. Because, if we are entering into this phase of life, there is the desire maybe, but also there are people out there that can absolutely help you across the spectrums of, number crunching and emotional aspect of money, as well as bringing you more closely together as a couple. And I think that equation is phenomenal. And that leads me on to my last question really for you. And we've talked about this a lot, right? But just if you can summarize it for me, Ed, and I know this might be challenging, but how can financial therapy help couples live that happy, fulfilling retirement?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to think about it is it can create that safe, vulnerable place to have new experiences with each other, right? So couples often know we've got to do this differently, but we feel uncomfortable to try doing it differently because when we do it on our own, we step on each other's toes and we get upset. So the thing I hear most from my clients, and Dan, I imagine you hear these from your clients, is you make it safe for us to talk about this.
Absolutely.
Right? And when they get that experience of safely talking about it, that doesn't just stay in the office. That can go back home with them because our brains are experience-based. And so if we can give their brains a safe place to experience a new way of talking with each other about money, with repetition, that will have a real impact. Right? And so it may not be that first time you meet with a financial planner or with a therapist, but if you trust that professional and you know that that's a safe place that you're going to go and talk about money together, over time you can generalize that back into you doing it on your own.
What a way to end. I absolutely love that. You said about rewinding the thing, the episode a couple of minutes ago. I think that's a rewind moment there, right? So rewind it. There's a button. There's a lovely button that you can hit. Go back 30 seconds. You don't have to rewind it.
Right. We're showing our age, Dan.
Exactly. Yeah. Press the rewind button. Hit pause. Hit the. So do that because I think it's amazing. Ed, I will put links to your book, your website, which has got wonderful blogs on it written all about these subjects and more, and to the podcast for people to make sure they start to consume the stuff that you put out, because I think it's so important and so vital. So thank you for making that change from a firefighter, and thank you for the journey that you've been on, because it's kind of put you in the place that you're doing amazing work for these people, and I really want to thank you for taking time out of your mid-afternoon to come and have a chat with me on this. It's been so enlightening.
Dan, thank you. It's been quite an honor, and your questions have been phenomenal and so encouraging. And I hope that people can hear that there is this. And Dan and I would both love to work with you, but there's a wonderful community of professionals that see not the world exactly the same way, but very similarly. And so there is support for you. So take the time to reach out to Dan, to me, or ask us, hey, do you know someone that can help us? Because we want couples to enjoy their life.
Exactly that. Could not agree more. And actually the community's building really nicely, right? There's a big community, global community, right? That I know many in the States, many in the UK, Australia, South Africa, where this, where the society is one that is more ingrained in a marriage around, retirement and work and that traditional kind of Western journey that people go on. There's some wonderful people. And if you reach out to us both, and we'd love to have that conversation with you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you, Ed. And that just leads me to thank everybody once again for listening in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. I hope this show will arm you with insights, strategies, and a newfound excitement for navigating life beyond the 9-to-5 grind. Remember, retirement isn't just an endpoint, it's a vibrant chapter brimming with opportunities for growth, adventure, and purpose. Keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the next phase of your life with enthusiasm. Until next time, may your retirement dreams continue to flourish and inspire.